Good morning. We are continuing with chapter 17 and learning about that Cold War with Soviet Union and the United States after World War II. Let's look at our key terms for the week. Who can tell me what communism is? Learned about it yesterday. What is communism? Chase.
An economic system with property and business are owned by the government for benefit of all.
Yeah, so it's that economic system where the government owns everything and then divvies it out to the people evenly. Does it work in the best ways? No. It was a good theory, but in reality, it doesn't work the way they meant it to. What about capitalism, Sam?
It's an economic system where businesses are privately owned.
Yeah, it's the economic system where businesses and property are privately owned. So again, it's not always the best as it is in theory, but at least there's the possibility that you can get out of a bad situation, that you can make it, you can earn more, you can get more. So sometimes we have the big disparity like the Elon Musks and then the homeless person on the street. There's a very big discrepancy between the two, but there is the possibility for the homeless person to get the help that they need to make it better. You're not stuck in one place. Who can tell me about superpowers? Not as in the Marvel, but superpower with the countries. Ryan.
A country with very great political and military power.
Yeah, it's those countries that have immense military and political power. So other countries follow them. They tell other countries what to do. They are the leaders of the countries. What happened during the Cold War, Chase?
It was the intense political conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1990.
Yeah, so it lasted from 1945 all the way to 1991 between the United States and the Soviet Union. They were fighting for who was going to be the biggest superpower. We didn't want communism to take over the world. They didn't want capitalism to take over the world. So we were fighting against each other. It was a political fight, so it wasn't a battle with guns. So it's called a war, but it's not a war that was fought with guns. What is a veteran? Who is a veteran? Tristan?
A person who has past military experience.
Yeah, it's a person who has served in the armed forces, especially someone who fought in a war. What is a suburb? Garrison?
An area and like an area right near a city, like on the border.
Yeah, it's the areas that are surrounding that urban area, that city. So we are a suburb. We live in suburbs of Minneapolis. We talked yesterday about how we have Minneapolis is on one side, St. Paul is on the other. Our neighborhoods are right up in there, so we are a suburb of Minneapolis. If anywhere surrounding Minneapolis is a suburb of Minneapolis surrounding St. Paul would be that suburb of St. Paul. So technically we are a suburb of Minneapolis. You could say we're in a suburb of the Twin Cities, but we are not in a suburb of St. Paul because we are closer to Minneapolis. Who can tell me about the Vietnam War? What did we talk about yesterday, Edward?
It was a war between Vietnam and the Soviets.
So Vietnam was split into two. There's North Vietnam, which was communist, South Vietnam, which was non-communist. So we helped out South Vietnam because we didn't want communism to spread. Soviet Union was helping out North Vietnam because they wanted communism to spread. So as we go through the chapter, we are going to learn more about that war. I passed out our chapter comprehension pages. So yesterday we did our introduction. So you make sure you fill in 2 details about communism and 2 details about capitalism that we talked about yesterday. Today we are going to start reading on page 367, The Cold War at Home. Oh, and I guess you could do number 2, what was the Cold War? So make sure you do both of those for the introductory section. Now we are at the Cold War at home, page 367. As the sense of fear brought on by the Cold War grew more intense, many Minnesotans responded by trying to build cocoons of safety around themselves. They got married in record numbers, had children, moved into comfortable new homes if they could find homes. Minnesota, like the rest of the country, faced a major housing shortage as thousands of World War II soldiers returned home. These veterans were ready to start new families, which pushed the demand for homes to an all-time high. Many Americans made do during the shortage by moving in with friends or relatives or by living in cramped apartments. Who remembers a term from a previous chapter that I said happened after World War II when all of these thousands of soldiers came home? The baby boom. Because they were wanting these families now. They wanted that protection, that safety. So these soldiers came home, they got married, and they started their families. So we had the big baby boom happen. Adding to the housing demand was a government program called the GI Bill of Rights. The GI Bill rewarded veterans by paying for their college education and by helping them get the loans they needed to buy their first homes. Without the GI Bill, many veterans never would have considered being homeowners. New homes were needed. The question was, who would build them? So there's all these people wanting their homes. Now we need construction companies. Suburb builder Orrin Thompson. Orrin Thompson built a lot of homes in Coon Rapids. Orrin Thompson was a farm boy at heart. He grew up on the family farm near Barrett in western Minnesota. He later told people he probably would have become a farmer himself if it hadn't been for the Great Depression. Instead, he left the farm to look for work. He became an electrician and found jobs in several Midwestern factories during World War II. When the war ended, Thompson started thinking about another line of work, building homes. Thompson saw an opportunity. I got intrigued, he said. People were just looking for shelter, for a roof over their heads. Thompson decided to build houses, but not just any houses. They had to be affordable and plentiful. Thompson's plan was simple. He would keep prices low by building his houses on the cheaper land located outside the main cities, and by using the same design over and over again. With this system, he could build dozens of houses in a matter of months. So in 1978, Orrin Thompson visited the first 3 houses he had built in Minneapolis decades earlier. In Richfield in 1954, cows and cars competed for space. As the suburbs expanded, they took over thousands of acres of highly productive farmland. So in Coon Rapids started getting built up in the 1950s. And Orrin Thompson built a lot of those original homes. So if I drive through the neighborhoods that are the original, they do all look alike. They're the small rambler houses, so they were more affordable because they were smaller houses and they were very similar. So if you go out, the farther outside of the big city you go, the cheaper the houses are. So if you go from Minneapolis all the way to Coon Rapids, that's pretty far out. So they were able to make these houses. They were able to buy the land for cheap, make affordable houses so people could actually buy those houses. Look at that picture with the cows and the houses right there. Does anybody live in a neighborhood that's close to a farm like that? I know we used to have a cow farm in Coon Rapids. We would have cow crossing signs at one spot, which was kind of funny. That's when I was a kid. But it's since been developed into neighborhoods. Your grandpa? Okay. Colin?
Along our dirt road, there's a cow farm.
Yeah, because you live in Ham Lake, right? And Ham Lake is just a little bit even farther north than Coon Rapids, definitely farther north than where we are here. So they still have more land and less of the suburban neighborhoods like we're used to here. Thompson built his first homes in South Minneapolis. Oh wait, I didn't read about that yellow box, the GI Bill of Rights. So look at page 368. U.S. lawmakers realized that the returning veterans would need help settling back into civilian life after the war. In 1944, before World War II ended, the federal government had passed the GI Bill of Rights. GI is a slang term for a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. It stands for Government Issue, which describes the equipment the military gives to soldiers. Through the GI Bill, the government helped veterans who wished to finish high school, go to college, start a business or a farm, or purchase a home. Assisting veterans was not the only reason for the GI Bill, though. The production of wartime goods during World War II had lifted the nation out of the Great Depression. No one was sure what the end of the war would mean for the economy. Remember, after World War I ended, there was the farm crisis. Then the Great Depression hit. So people were scared, there was this big war. We got our economy back on track, but now that the war's ended, are we going to go back into another depression? The federal government was concerned that the nation might slip back into an economic depression. By offering affordable loans to buy homes and start businesses, the government hoped to maintain the good economic times the war had brought on. So did we go back into another depression? No, we did not. So this helped. All right, page 370. Thompson built his first homes in South Minneapolis near the site of the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. At that time, the area was more country than city. One day, a young couple came to look at a home that Thompson had built and joked about how far from the downtown area it was. Do you get a cow with the house, they asked, because there were so many farms in the area. Soon, Thompson's company was buying up large pieces of land even farther away from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and building entire neighborhoods on them. People called these communities suburbs because they were built just outside the urban Twin Cities. Each house looked almost identical to the one next door. In the words of one company official, Orrin Thompson homes came in three colors: white, white, and white, because they all looked alike. Suburbs grow. The suburbs are exploding with new homes and new neighborhoods. People who previously lived and worked in Minneapolis or St. Paul lined up to buy Thompson's little white houses. They did not seem to mind that Thompson's neighborhoods were miles from downtown, miles even from the outermost stops on the streetcar lines. Thompson had kept the prices of his homes low. That helped make them enormously popular. Another major force behind the creation of suburbs was the automobile. Why do you think the automobile is going to play an important role in suburbs, Naveen?
Because people can still drive to the city and stuff.
Yeah, because the streetcar stops, that's like the buses of that time, the streetcar stops were miles away from these suburbs. So how would people get downtown? They have to own their own automobiles. If you live in an area that has good public transportation, you can get anywhere you want without having to get in a car. So you can save a lot of money by not buying a car. You can just take the bus, you can walk, you can bike, you can take the streetcar. And now we have the light rail train. But if you live out in the suburbs, my house, I can't walk to the closest Target, or I could probably walk to Cub, but it would be really cold in the wintertime, and it would be a long walk. Okay. In the city, it's just on the street corner. It's super close. So it's more necessary to have a car. Paul, I need you to stop talking, please. In the suburbs, it's more necessary to have that car, especially in Minnesota in the wintertime. Let's see. Another major force behind the creation of the suburbs was the automobile. Thanks to the car, city residents were no longer tied to the streetcar lines. They could hop in their new Fords, Chevrolets, and Oldsmobiles and drive many miles in the same time it had once taken them to travel just 1 mile by foot or by streetcar. So let's look at that picture. In the years after World War II, some individual homeowners and even entire neighborhoods placed restrictions on who could buy their homes. What did we read about in the last chapter? What was one of the restrictions that they placed on buying a home? Anybody remember? Edward?
I just read number 10. It's a property shall not be sold or rented to used or occupied by any person of the black,
Semitic or Mongolian races. So that number 10, that's what we learned about in the last chapter on how people were limiting who could live in areas. So we still had discrimination. So black, African American, Semitic. Does anybody know who would be Semitic? Anybody know that term? Andrea? Think about your, is it great grandpa?
German,
Not German.
Austrian, or
Italian?
Why did he leave?
because
He was
Jewish.
Jewish. So if somebody is anti-Semitic, they are racist against Jewish people. So if somebody is Semitic, they are Jewish. But you'll hear the term anti-Semitic. So if somebody is being anti-Semitic, that's what the Nazis were. They were opposed to Jewish people. Mongolian is what we call somebody who has, it's a very old term, we don't use it anymore, but it would be somebody who had one of their parents was white and one of their parents was African American. So they had both in them.
I thought it was like
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the country.
So I don't know why that term, the Mongolian term, was used for people that had the different mixed cultures. I'm not sure.
So, but now it's called mix.
Yes,
Or there's
there's different terms that they use.
One
What was that?
of the words we did, one of the words we used to be mixed people, and I know it starts with a B.
Biracial.
Yeah, biracial.
Yep, biracial is the more proper term to use because they have bi means two, so they have two different races. So it's not just white European like I am. All right, so let's look at all of these different things that you might be restricted on. So number 6 was no trailer, basement, tent, shack, garage, or other structure shall at any time be used temporarily or permanently as a residence. So you can't live in someone's garage. You had to actually have a house. Number 7, no business or commercial enterprise shall be maintained or carried on upon said lot or any portion thereof. It is a house. It is for residential use only. You can't have a business out of your house. Number 8, no part of said lot shall be used for raising, grazing, keeping, or harboring of any wild or domestic animals except a dog, cat, or bird. So a big thing, like they were talking about a bird like a parakeet in a cage in your house. Now they've rezoned a lot of areas to allow for chickens. Okay, so and some people have like pet pigs. So they have changed and allowed more animals. Number 9, the above property is subject to an easement which has been issued in favor of the Northern States Power Company and the Northwestern Bell Telephone Company over the rear 5 feet of the above described premises. And I think that's that they have the lines, the power lines and the telephone lines. Said property shall not be sold, rented to, or used or occupied by any person of the Black, Semitic, or Mongolian races. A residential plot, as the terms is used here, it is either of a lot as plotted in that's the neighborhood edition, or all of one lot and a part or parts of one or more adjoining lots. And these restrictions are to run with the land, and the benefits and burdens thereof shall be binding upon all purchasers, owners, and mortgages of said several lots and parcels until the first day of January 1975. So this was when the neighborhoods were started in the 50s. And they're saying not until 1975 can you start changing these. And then it says, at which time they shall cease to be of further force and effect. So it wasn't until 1975 that they could start selling to an African American family or a Jewish family. That's pretty sad. Let's look at the green box. Downtown decline and urban renewal. The decades after World War II were a boom time for many people and communities. Between 1950 and 1960, the number of Minnesotans who lived in suburbs nearly tripled. At the same time, however, the populations of St. Paul and Minneapolis began to shrink. As people moved away from the downtown areas, businesses followed. When offices, churches, department stores, and movie theaters moved to the suburbs, so did the money they invested in buildings and the taxes they paid to the city government. With less income to pay for street repairs and building upkeep, cities began to suffer. Neighborhoods became run down, which drove out more businesses and residents. Before the war, the downtown of Minneapolis and St. Paul had been the business centers of the state. By the 1960s, this was changing. Some city leaders in St. Paul and Minneapolis began to think about something called urban renewal. And this is something that's still going on in major cities. They looked for ways to renew or rebuild the strong, vibrant downtowns and urban neighborhoods. Slowly, over decades, things began to change. Crumbling buildings came down to make way for new businesses and housing. Riverfront areas were cleaned up and new parks, museums, and theaters were built to attract visitors and residents. As the 1900s ended, the downtown areas of Minnesota's Twin Cities were more alive than they had been in decades. So the neighborhoods, they've revived them. So now there's different neighborhoods that are like the cool place to live. You want to go live in the uptown area. It's not run down and falling apart. It's a renewal. They've breathed new life into these areas that people had moved out of. Now new people have moved into them. Planning for future growth. This is another sidebar that's got questions on it. As the leaders of Minneapolis and St. Paul were trying to fix the downtown areas, state leaders were concerned about the growth of suburbs. From the 1950s on, more and more farmland was bought up to make way for houses, businesses, and roads. Local governments took care of their own communities, but no one was overseeing the region as a whole. In 1967, the state government came up with a solution. It created the Metropolitan Council to plan for growth in the 7 counties that made up the Twin Cities metropolitan area. In the words of Governor Harold LaFander, this council was created to do a job which has proved too big for any single community. The chief job of the Metropolitan Council was to study how land is used in the Twin Cities metropolitan area and to recommend ways to grow that were smart and environmentally friendly. Among other things, it was charged with planning for regional parks. It also directed Metro Transit, the region's public transportation system, including buses, light rail, commuter rail, and transportation for people with disabilities. As of 2013, the Metropolitan Council was considered one of the most successful regional planning organizations in the entire United States. Colin?
Did they change the spelling of Anoka?
Anoka, no. That's how Anoka is spelled.
Like A after
No. No. This is how Anoka's always been spelled. So, like, I live in Coon Rapids, which is just next to Anoka. Here, so we're in Anoka County, but here at St. Vincent de Paul, we're in, I believe, Hennepin County, right? So they're right next to each other. So I just have to hop over the 610 and get over here. It's super quick. So those counties, you can live on one side and work in another side. Keeping up with suburban growth. Orrin Thompson and others like him were building houses so fast that communities had trouble keeping up. Often, an entire neighborhood was built before the local government could install water and sewer lines. The few paved roads were often clogged with traffic until more roads could be built. Communities struggled to build new schools fast enough for all the new young children. Still, the people kept coming. They were willing to put up with disadvantages of life in a new suburb if they could also enjoy the advantages. Among those advantages, few were considered more important than a modern home, especially one with a brand new kitchen. So you had the latest and greatest appliances, and you could do so much more with your kitchens. Domestic ideal, Betty Crocker, the all-electric kitchen. After World War II, many of the hundreds of thousands of young women who had worked during the war left their jobs. Some were happy to do so. They filled in when there was a shortage of workers, but were not interested in keeping their wartime jobs. Others were not so happy. These women wanted to remain working, but were pressured to leave jobs as men returned from war and looked for work. So let's look at that modern kitchen with electric appliances was one of the highlights of the new suburban home. So what kind of stove do you think they had before there was an electric stove? Real? Yeah, they had gas stoves. Now, Mr. Gambino grew up with a gas stove in his house and he misses it. He likes cooking with the gas stove. I always grew up with an electric stove, so it's what I'm used to. When you turn it on, I know how to cook with it. It's easy for me to use. We don't have to worry about having that gas line hooked up to the house because it's just plugged into the electric. So gas stoves are still around. There are people who love them. But back in the 1950s, it was, we want the newest and the greatest and the bestest. So there was a big push to move everything to be electric. Electric dishwashers. What did they do before an electric dishwasher? They used their hands. They had to wash by hand. So, oh my goodness, now we have a dishwasher to use. Electric water heater, electric refrigerator, electric garbage disposal. I don't even have a garbage disposal. We chose not to put one in because Mr. Gambino, when he was growing up, it kept getting backed up and they kept having to clean it out and he said it was disgusting. So it's easier for us just to compost instead of put it down the disposal. An electric home freezer, all those small appliances. So lots of things that they used for convenience. Either way, many of these young women were taking on the roles of wife, mother, and homemaker. For many new housewives, having a modern kitchen with electric appliances helped them in their new roles. Food companies such as Minnesota's General Mills developed products that appealed to women in the post-war period. At the center of General Mills' advertising plan was a make-believe kitchen expert named Betty Crocker. General Mills had created Betty Crocker in the 1920s. The company had hired an artist to paint her portrait and added her signature to the recipes and the cooking advice it gave out to consumers. Over time, Betty Crocker turned into the main symbol of General Mills. Researchers at General Mills determined that many young post-war women were in need of someone to show them how to make good meals for their growing families. They needed a patient, knowledgeable, and reassuring guide. General Mills believed Betty Crocker was just the woman for the job. Now, my mom had a cookbook. It was a Betty Crocker cookbook, and it got passed on to me when my mom passed away. So now I have this cookbook from probably when my mom and dad got married. They have all of these recipes in it, and it's this big, huge cookbook. And that's what women use to make recipes for their families. My mom used it all the time. I like to just go onto the internet and find new and exciting recipes with new flavors for us. But they didn't have the internet back then. So they would have these big cookbooks that had how to make anything and everything. Gianna's now into cooking, and she likes to get a cookbook that's just focused on one thing, like maybe desserts or chicken meals you can make using chicken. So they have a lot of specialty cookbooks, but back during this time is when they had cookbooks that had all the recipes. Yeah.
My grandma at her house, she used to have a whole wall full of cookbooks, and they'd feed from like her grandma.
Yeah.
And so they have super cool.
Yep. And sometimes those really old recipes are the best recipes. Because I found some really good ones in my mom's cookbook that I'm like, wow, this is something we'd make again. Andrea.
My mom has this ordinary cookbook from her mom, and it's in Spanish, and it's like
very, very thick, and the print is very, very tiny.
Yeah, that's like the Betty Crocker cookbook. It's like this thick and it's super tiny print. Sam?
I think my mom has one for my great grandma.
Mhm.
And I think she made it. My great grandma made it.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, so it's always fun to get have those recipes that you can pass on down. So we have made it through number 8. We have not started with the Cold War overseas, so we will work on that. Let's see, tomorrow's art day, so we will be finishing up the chapter on Thursday. We'll finish up our reading, and we will correct on Friday. We are not having a test. This comprehension page will go in the grade book as your test grade. My friends at home, we hope you are well, and we hope to see you soon.